So today I was asked to give a talk. Let's see. Wait till the restart. All right, recording has started. So I've been asked to give a talk about getting prepared for interviews. We do a lot of different marketing efforts. Let me go ahead and start the slideshow. I am watching the chat, so feel free to leave comments or questions and put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to answer those as we go along. This should probably be about 30, 40 minutes, nothing big, but I'm going to give you kind of the lowdown on interviews, and I'll get into the reason why I was asked to do this. But the idea here is to put your best voice forward. You know, when you're going out into the world and you're trying to sell your books, you're going to events, you're doing marketing, one of the things that you can do potentially is to get out there and actually get on interviews, whether this many different types of interviews, and we'll talk a little bit about them. So we do advertising, we do email marketing, we do newsletter swaps, we pay for, book promos, we do a lot of things, but interviews are starting to get ways to get into areas that are very specific to our niche and what we're writing, to get in front of eyeballs of people, or get in front of earballs, in some respects, get in front of the ears and the eyeballs of people who are ready to spend money to buy our books. So this is a very focused, very ready to purchase audience very often, because they are actively listening to whatever they're listening to. It's something that really interests them. And this really matters for a couple of reasons. We have a couple different types of interviews out there. First one being the kind of the old school TV, video TV, maybe local cable access type of stuff. That's a little bit more rare. Maybe not as not the first option you would want to kind of look at. Next, we might hear is kind of radio stations. This would be maybe local NPR, maybe some call-in shows, AM talk radio, things of that nature. Maybe a little bit more accessible for us as indie authors who don't have a publisher behind us. These maybe we can get our feet into that. I know a few individuals. Like I think Tony has done some call-in NPR type of interviews. Maybe at the end we can talk to people who've actually done some interviews, and what their experience was like. The next one down is maybe from here on down, from the third one down, is pretty much where a lot of indie authors, when you're just getting started, you can get access to audiences, whether it's YouTube or Facebook Live interviews. These can be live or pre-recorded, so either one. More often than not, they're pre-recorded. It's really hard to do like a live conversation. Let's see, Tony said it was the Frisky show, and she did her Mildred promo. Yeah, it was a good interview. Next, after YouTube or Facebook, we'll get into podcasts as being kind of that new kind of on-demand radio. We've talked about podcasts in the past. We've talked about audio. Podcasts tend to be pre-recorded. They're almost never live. There are some podcasts that are live and then they release an audio, unedited version of the audio after that. These are kind of bigger podcasts, that kind of happens with the Joe Rogan podcast, where it's just recorded live and then it's pumped right out. Most podcasts, are, especially interview podcasts, are pre-recorded, edited, and then put out. So that's kind of the normal thing. And also, I just want to talk a little bit about solo interviews. If you're creating kind of a YouTube channel where you have readers who send you questions and you want to just kind of answer questions, it's sort of like an interview style where you're reading the question that's being asked to you and then you're answering it on camera in front of, for other people to consume. So another type of alternative to interviewing is maybe something that you can produce yourself. And somebody who does a lot about this, if you just want to look it up and see it done really, really well, we're talking about, you always have to gauge when we talk about things that are done really well, is there's a lot of money and effort behind it. But Brandon Saracen, who's the fantasy author who just crushed it with the Kickstarter campaign for his books, Brandon Sanderson, I always screw up his last name, Sanderson. Google it, you'll find it. He has a really good YouTube channel where there's a lot of interview style. Some of them are solo interviews where he's just answering questions. They can be 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes long. You can also, he talks a little bit about his stories, about his books. So it's just a style of doing an ongoing interview, if you can think of it in that way. Those are other types of interviews that you could engage in, if you're trying to drive content and interest in who you are. So the first question is, why does audio matter? A lot of the options that I talked about are audio options that people can do while multitasking. So if I'm listening to the radio, I can clean the dishes. If I'm listening to a podcast, I can go out and walk with my kids, right? Multitasking is becoming very, very important, and a lot of people do the listening as an option to get more content while they're doing something that might be more mundane, something like mowing the lawn. Like, for example, I love mowing the lawn and listening to Dan Carlin hardcore history episodes. Those are things that I like to do. So it's like I'm learning while I'm doing something I kind of bored at. Really great to fill time. As I said, you can do things while you're doing it, like reading books, lectures, education, whatever it might be. So this is why audio matters. Everybody has a listening device in their pockets. The little black monoliths from 2001 are all in our pockets right now. And they have the ability to listen to things, whether it's YouTube, podcasts, whatever it might be. All right, the ease of use is going through the roof. And this is why it's important. So the question is, why am I an interview expert? The answer is I'm not, but I do have a podcast that I've been doing for 2 years now with my wife. We have done 60 interviews now, roughly over 100 hours of finished audio that has been released on our feed. Most of our interviews last about an hour. It takes me about an hour and a half to record. It takes me about 2 hours to edit that. So it's about 1 minute for finished audio. It takes me about 2 minutes to edit. I do about an hour of prep work, breakdown, setup. So for each interview, I spend about 6 to 8 hours per interview, which means I've spent a total of 20 days interviewing, total, nonstop. So I have a little bit of experience. I know there was already Stephanie, who's on the call right now, said that she's going to be doing a podcast interview. And so I think this will be really geared towards what you're trying to do. And if anybody else is trying to get into like a podcast or into a YouTube channel that does interviews about books and authors, this I think is really important information that you'll want to take with you, and it will extrapolate up to if you do kind of like a phone-in call interview or any type of other type of show or local cable access type of thing. I think all of this applies. All right, so I'm actually going to be giving this presentation in terms of the interviewer's perspective. A lot of times people can get up here and say, well, you got to prepare for your interview, you got to do this, and you got to make sure you do this. I'm going to actually tell you what I expect to see when I'm actually the interviewer. So I've done a lot of them. At first, I didn't know what to expect, and now I kind of have some expectations. And so I'll give you that information of what I like to see and what I have seen as being successful in terms of making me have a good experience interviewing you. And maybe you can take some of that learning and bring it into what you do if you happen to go onto a show. Part of it, I will be frank. And if you have some of these like tics when you talk, or if you have some of these issues, it's not because I'm trying to make fun of you. I will not apologize for nothing. I will apologize for nothing, but they are things that you'll probably have to improve if you want to get onto an interview show or onto a podcast. You want to be aware of it. So we'll talk a little bit about what those issues are, and maybe you can find ways to improve yourself when you get onto a radio show. So hopefully this will be good. So what we're going to talk about is knowing your show, getting the questions, researching, making notes, talking about audio gear, and making sure that you know what you're saying and how you're saying it. Some cases, especially with YouTube interview shows, they will want to see your face as well. And so there'll be some concerns there. And then we'll talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts at the end. So these are the topics we're going to touch, and we'll get into a little bit more detail. So the first thing you want to do is if you're going out there and marketing yourself and you want to get onto a show and you found a bunch of shows, a bunch of podcasts, maybe a couple of YouTube channels, and you start putting out the emails and the communications to them to see if you can get on. If they come back and say, yes, I want to schedule you, let's get you started, maybe something later this month, and maybe, it'll be released in about 2 to 3 months from here. It is immediately your job is you want to begin to know the show that you're getting onto. Okay. I would always advise you to listen to the last few episodes of what that show is, understand how long it is. There are 2 types of interview shows that I've seen. Some are Q&A, where I've asked you a question and then you give a response for a certain period of time. Others are a little bit more conversational, where there may be multiple personalities on the call that will be interjecting into the conversation, and then you'll be responding to what they say. So I call that more conversational, where it's like a couple people are you're basically having a talk around a table, as opposed to a strict normal interview style. So you want to make sure you know which ones you're getting into. So I have a question. I think this would be good for applying. No, applying what? Diana, maybe you want to come off mute and just clarify that.
I'm just saying, I would think that that a person would do that before they'd even apply, check it out to see.
Exactly. But what I'm talking about is if you like listen to a couple episodes and you're like, yeah, they're talking about what I like, then I want you to go back and listen to a few more. Especially in the last like month or two. A lot of times shows will come out once a week or maybe every other week. So you'll want to go back a couple months and listen to what has come up, because a lot of times shows will be doing themes, or they'll be doing kind of blocked segments of common show types. Like, oh, we're going to be interviewing sci-fi writers who specifically, you know, are in the military space marine genre, right? And if you listen to the last show or the show before, okay, they do kind of what I do. But then if you notice that it's a pattern, you will have that information going into the show. So I got into one where they asked me, what made you happy? Next thing you want to know is if they meander a lot, because this can be unsettling if it's your first time interviewing. If they're more of a strict Q&A style interview, that's a little bit more comforting because you know what's coming. But if they like to meander and jump and ask weird questions here and there, that can be a little unsettling. So you want to make sure you know and prepare for that. And also, do they do social media? You can also see what's been most shared and what's been most watched if they have a fan base, or maybe what has the most comments on whatever they've posted, whether it's on YouTube or on like Twitter or Facebook. And if they have a Facebook group, you can definitely go and see what has been generated the most heat, most interest, and then that might be a show you want to watch. Next, when you get into a show and they've approved you, a good show will provide you a list of questions and topics. Now, when my wife and I do interview prep, we are asking them questions about themselves, and then we generate questions from that. And then they'll have a list of questions. If they don't have the questions, if they don't give you questions, you need to ask for them. These don't have to be very specific, but you just want to have a guideline of what the conversation is going to center around, so that they know what to ask you. So if you have something specific, like if you're just an author, okay, that's one thing. But if you're a nonfiction author that's talking specifically about, we have one author who talks about foster parents. If they don't know that you're a foster parent, if that's your book's about, the questions that they're going to be asking you are going to be very broad. You want to make sure that they're more focused so you can help them generate good questions to help tease out good content. Okay. If they say they just go with the flow, I would then say, go listen to those previous episodes, pull out common questions that they tend to ask, and then go ahead and be prepared for that. Absolutely 100%. Do not wing it on the pod. If you go into a podcast, you go into a YouTube interview, Facebook interview, do not wing it. You want to make sure you're prepared in some respect of what you want to say. It comes across when you wing it because you're stilted. You may have some, marble mouth. You may be confused. You may kind of meander. You want to make sure you're not winging it. Okay. Furthermore, research your interviewer. See if they have maybe like a public persona. If they have like a Twitter page, it's also good to know that, what they are like, because you may want to know that, okay, they're this type of person or this type of person, or they're a little bit more of like, a little bit more incendiary here and there. And you may want to make sure that you're aware of that before you hop into the conversation. Most of the time, the interviewer will have the same persona that they have on their show. And that's kind of what you want to key to, but sometimes you want to know who you're interviewing with. Next, now that you've done that initial research, and again, this does not take a lot of time. If you're going to get on a show, you might devote 3 or 4 hours of time listening to what they were talking about, finding out what they're about, and then you get the questions. Go ahead and make some notes based on what the questions are. But remember, this is not a script. You cannot read from a script. It comes across as reading from a script. It does not sound well. If it doesn't sound good to them, it's not going to sound good to their listeners. And it makes a bad impression on you. So you want to make sure that you're talking off of notes, good, organized, clear notes. It can be very detailed, but make sure you have good notes. It really helps you if you get stuck in certain situations. It also you have prepared your mind for what's coming up. Super important. Almost every person who I've interviewed has taken our questions and have broken them out and actually made organized notes. Really, really good thing to do. Okay. Also, when you get in there, make sure you have a list of your books ready to talk about. Sometimes when you get into the heat of the moment or you're in the conversations, you start to forget very simple things. Like if you don't remember the name of your books, it makes you look pretty bad. So make sure you've written the titles of your books down if you have to quickly reference them. You'd be shocked what you forget during an interview. Just things go right out of the mind. So make sure you have that information in front of you. Also, if you've listened to the previous episodes and you can key in on previous conversations that the listeners may have heard maybe the week before or 2 weeks before, and you're referencing really good books that happen to be something that somebody talked about earlier or other authors, have good lists of recommendations written down, ready to go. I always love hearing people make really good recommendations that are not obvious, like, oh, have you read this obvious book that everybody's read? If you're referencing good recommendations of like research material, if you're a nonfiction author, or if you're in a genre, you'd be like, I really, pride myself to be similar to this person. If that's a new author, the readers will get excited because they'll treat you like an authority and go out and look at that author as well. It sounds good when you have good recommendations during your conversation, if it fits into the question. Also, most interviewers will always ask you for a good final comment. So definitely make sure that you have a short, tight final comment. If it's a show about being an author, talk about, why it's important to write. If it's all about reading good books, it's all about reading really good books, and maybe you have a good recommendation as your final comment, things like that. Okay, so, and also it's really good to take notes during the talk. A lot of times interviewers will have long-winded questions, and maybe you have to make a note or two. Absolutely safe to do that. Definitely have a pad of paper and a pen ready in case you have to take a note or two, because sometimes they'll ask multiple part questions, and it's good to maybe just quickly jot down what those things are so you can hit each one. All right. Now we're going to get into the heat of it. Time to put your best voice forward. So this is Squidward from Futurama. Your sound quality is bad and you should feel bad. So this is probably the most important thing outside of the research, outside of everything that we've talked about up to this point. You want to make sure you put your best voice forward. 100% at the bottom bullet is probably the most important. A third of my interviews start with audio issues. 1/3, every single one. I'm like dreading it when I walk in because it's 99% it's user error. They've connected something wrong. Their headphones don't work. They haven't tried Zoom before. They haven't practiced beforehand. They don't know how to select the audio selections because it's choosing their webcam instead of their Bluetooth headphones or whatever it might be. They haven't practiced. They haven't prepared, and it comes in and it grinds my gears. And it's always an issue. So most of the interviews start with audio issues. So be prepared for that. The ones that don't, when the person comes in and they sound really good, it just puts me at ease as an interviewer and makes it, more enjoyable right out of the bat. Because if I'm having to, decode your problem from, across the ether, it's you're immediately starting off on the wrong foot. So practice beforehand. You can do a Zoom call beforehand. You can test it inside your house. Be familiar, make sure that the thing, whatever you're talking into, you've practiced beforehand and you've done it before and you know how it's set up. So most of the interviews that I've seen with respect to podcasts, YouTube videos, even Facebook Live videos, a lot of times people are using Zoom to pre-record that. So if you have some good experience with Zoom, because it's free, under 10 people or whatever, most of the podcasters are using Zoom to record. We use Zoom to record our stuff. I know we use Skype here, but Skype is free because it allows us to have multiple people on the call. Zoom is the preferred method of recording the audio. Okay, so be prepared, get some experience with that. All right, so this is where it's going to hurt some people's feelings, but I don't care. First thing, the tics, also known as how to not get invited back or not get invited on future podcasts. First one that I always tell people, when you do tippy tap fingers and you're playing slap tables and you're moving stuff around like I'm doing right now, I cannot edit that. I cannot fix that. And shuffling your papers, I can't fix that. Loud squeaky chairs, I cannot fix that. So be aware of that. Don't play piano on the table when you're talking. If you've got to move your arms, move them above you. Move above the table. It's the best. So if I can hear it, so can the listeners. So just be aware of that. Don't do that. Now, with respect to not all editors are very nice because they don't want to make their podcast sound great or their episodes sound good. Or if they're editing video, they don't want to clip every 10 seconds for you saying ums. So try to get your ums under control. Get them under control. If it's a podcast, I clip out 80 or 90% of ums as part of my podcast. So I do a lot of work to make you sound really good. The next ones, this one will hurt people's feelings the most. A lot of people have what I call space cadet pauses and space cadet words. So I'll pretend like I'm the space cadet. So I'll read it. So I really want to be an accomplished children's author, right? Those long pauses are murder. It's murder, murder, murder. Please don't do that. The next one, it's even worse because I can fix the pauses. I just go in and clip it, but I can't fix your context words that you want to draw out. So I really want to be an accomplished children's author. I can't fix that. You just sound like it. You just sound like a crazy person. Don't do this. I beg people to do this, to stop doing this I run through all of these things before I do any interview with who I'm interviewing. I can't fix those context words, and it just really doesn't sound very good. And sometimes I'll actually just clip out some of the words, like the so, because it's a filler word. Although you tell them that, I do. I don't call it space cadet words or space cadet pauses. I say, please don't pause very much, and please don't draw out your context words. It's hard for me to edit that. The next one is the vocal fry. And if you haven't heard what a vocal fry is, just go Google it. If you do it, stop doing it. It just doesn't sound very good. It's essentially at the end of a sentence, the person will drop their register. Men and women do this. Younger women tend to do it a little bit more than anyone else. But they'll basically, when they end their sentence, they don't end powerful and strong. They end and their voice starts grinding, and it's called a vocal fry. And when people have their earbuds in and they're listening to your show, it's basically a giant vocal fry in their head, and it sounds really bad. So make sure you're aware of this. A lot of the NPR people do it, and they're trying to fix it. I know there's an effort there. It's like nails on the chalkboard. I absolutely agree. Once you know what a vocal fry is, you can never unhear it. All right, next thing. When you're in your interview, don't crosstalk. So don't talk over people. Don't talk over the other people. The interviewers will try not to do that to you. Sometimes they do. They like to interject. And sometimes if there's some playful banter where something's funny, that's okay. But if they're asking questions, let them ask their question and then go ahead and then start your answer. Don't talk over their question, because it's almost impossible to edit that. And a lot of people will try to edit that and clean that up. And if you get a lot of crosstalk, it's just really difficult to edit that. And it could sound very grating on the ears of the listener. The listener just wants to hear somebody talk. They want to hear the other person talk. They don't want to hear both of them talking at the same time, because it gets very jumbled. When you have audio in your ears, it does not have the same spatial effects as sitting in a room listening to somebody talk, because a lot of times your ears can gauge volume of somebody sitting on the other side of the room and kind of subtract that out and focus on just the person you're talking to. But when everybody's talking and it sounds like they're right in front of you, it can be very distracting to a listener. Okay. Next thing, talk in paragraphs. No one word answers, no one sentence answers. Try to make sure that goes back to having good notes. Make sure that you are talking in paragraphs. A lot of times when I ask somebody, I'll tell them ahead of time, when we ask you a question, feel free to pause for a second or two and then go ahead and answer, or gather your thoughts, because it will be edited. A lot of my editing work and a lot of the cleanup work is around the questions. So when somebody stops talking and somebody else starts talking, you want to make sure that sounds as good as possible. You end up doing a lot of editing for that. Make sure you take a pause, gather your thoughts, and then go ahead and talk in paragraphs. You're going to want to talk for a couple minutes on a subject or on a question, or tell a story or whatever it might be. Take your time, talk in paragraphs. And all of this matters. Why? Well, if you contact me and say, hey, I'd like to be on your podcast, and I've been on other podcasts and I do a really good job, I will go out and Google you before I have agreed to go onto your show, and I will listen for a few minutes and see how you are. If you're not good, I'll deny your access to the podcast, because I now have learned through bad interviews that I don't want bad interviews. I want good interviews. I have had people, I won't say names or, episodes or whatever, but it was very frustrating. 1 hour interview takes me 4 or 5 hours to edit, and I just can't have that. And so because it's just a waste of my time. I'd rather go get somebody else to interview. So do make sure that you do a good job, because I as an interviewer may be listening to what you've done in the past, and I may say yes or no based on that. So I've had some questions here. So do you send them a transcript of questions or a clip of your questions? So I will send them, we send them basically a sheet. It's a form, in essence, a form letter that gives you information and talks a lot about the things I've talked about here. And it lists about 6 or 7 questions. Now, in the interview, sometimes we will have a question that will be on a certain topic. They will answer that. I will then have a follow-up question asking more about that topic. And that may not be in the list of questions. And that's very common in interviews where, like, oh, you wrote this book. Oh, yeah, I wrote this book because I was inspired by this event and this type of thing that happened in my life. Oh, really? How did you overcome that challenge and get your words in and doing that? Oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. That was not a question that was in the list of questions, but it's an add-on. A good interviewer will key in on something that you said to ask more clarifying questions. A good interviewer is a proxy for the listener. The listener is listening to you talk. They naturally want to hear more about a certain topic. A good interviewer will have a natural, I'm not saying I'm really good at this, but I'm saying a good interviewer will naturally key in on something that they think the listener will want to hear more on. And they'll ask you a follow-up question. So you'll get the 6 or 7 or 8 questions that I normally send you, but a lot of times I'll have another 4 or 5 questions that I'll ask about context about what you said. So a good interviewer listens to what their interviewee is saying, and then they key in on that. Okay, but this is a back and forth couple sessions then. So no, it's a one sit down. Maybe Diana, I'll clarify. Maybe we sit down for 60 minutes and we go back and forth. It's not live. No, we don't do anything live for our show. There are a lot of shows that do things live, but I think a lot of people like to make sure things are clean and edited. So a lot of times they will pre-record and then they'll post it. So it's not a back and forth type of thing. Yeah, but then it is edited. You're right. But with a podcast or even sometimes on YouTube videos, you'll see little clips, little jump cuts. And that's because they've edited out something that maybe wasn't pertinent to the show, or maybe there was a mistake. Sometimes I'll have an interviewer and I'll tell people on the podcast that we're interviewing, oh, hey, if you have a mistake or if you misstated something or you just want to clean something up, and all you had to do is say stop, or you stop and just say, hey, you know what? I'd like to rephrase that. And then you take a second and then you rephrase it. When I'm editing, I clip all that stuff out. So it just sounds very natural, like it's just flowing. And so I do a lot of work to make sure things are clean. So I let people know that if you make a mistake or you're like, if you're making fun of the wrong person or you're dumping on Brandon Saracen for being super wealthy, and you didn't want that in there, I'll edit that out for you. But sometimes people will ask to restate things along the way. So hopefully that answers the questions. All right, last thing, put your best voice forward. So first one, and I know there's a few people in this room, don't be a degenerate and shout into your laptop. And I'm looking at you, Apple users. I don't care what Tim Cook has told you. Your webcam and your microphone on your laptop are not good enough. They're not good enough. They're fine giving talks here at the co-op. That's fine. Not talking about that. But if you get on a call-in show or on a podcast and you think it's okay to shout at your laptop, you're doing it wrong. Also, earbuds are not always the best. Well, I bought the $150 earbuds that Tim Cook wanted me to have. They're not good enough. A lot of times with the wired or wireless earbuds, there can be noise there, especially with the wireless Bluetooth ones. There's kind of this noise level thing and there's a clipping. And if you want to hear what that sounds like, I can point you to an interview I did. And it clipped this guy's audio, and it sounded like a little a mechanical clip or a mechanized robotic clip on his voice, and it drove me insane. Also, the hanging earbuds. Do you know what hanging earbuds do when you're moving your head around? They bump into your chin, and they cause terrible, audio issues. Or sometimes they float away from your mouth and it gets distant, and I can't fix that. Or I can, but I don't want to fix it. So don't do that. All right. Avoid the Bluetooth wireless headphones. Also, watch out for ambient noise. If you're somewhere where it's loud, your dog barking in the background is very funny, but when it happens like 3 or 4 times, I'm starting to get annoyed because I have to go and edit all that out. Okay, so just be aware of that. I've had numerous people do their entire interview from their car in front of a library. Totally fine, absolutely fine, because they go, oh, my house is very loud or I have a lot of kids. Totally understandable. Don't do your interview at a coffee shop. Lots of ambient noise, very bad. Okay. You'll not always get nice editors like me who take pride in making sure the quality of the audio is good for the listener. Some people just they'll pump out an interview and they'll just dump it out. So be aware of this, because anything that makes you sound bad, the listener thinks it sounds bad, and then they associate that with you. So just don't do that to yourself. Okay, so let's talk about gear. Small microphone that came with my computer? No. Can I use my overpriced MacBook microphone? No. Can I speak into my iPhone headphones? No, but I actually have had good experiences with iPhones and headphones. But the reason why I don't think that's a good one is a lot of times there's a lot of things on people's phones that can interrupt and can cause potential issues. So if you are going to use your iPhone, maybe turn the cell off and just leave it on the Wi-Fi, but then you can get messages and it needs to be silenced and things are buzzing. Again, using your phone is okay, but maybe try to stick away from that if you have a quiet space. Next, don't buy a bunch of gear. You don't need it. So we'll talk about what you do need. What I would suggest is best. So your 12-year-old Android phone is out. Yes, Tony, I'm pretty certain your 12-year-old Android phone is out. Speed of the phone affects the quality of the audio going in, how the app is handling your audio, if the app can handle your audio and then send it over the Wi-Fi to the person who's recording it, right? So if you have an old phone that's a little laggy and it's slow and it glitches a little bit here and there, or maybe crashes once in a while, you don't want to use that. You don't want to put your whole interview on the back of an old phone, right? So that's kind of what I'm saying here. So what would I suggest? A very simple, nice USB microphone that plugs into your computer, whether it's a desktop or whether it's a laptop, and wired earbuds. So I said the earbuds earlier, but wired earbuds that plug into your phone, into your computer, or over-the-ear headphones. That's kind of what I'm using right now, and I'll just show you I'll give you a little window into my office here. So let's see. Can you see that? Let's see. Can I make this? I'll turn it off. I'll show you later. So I'm using my over-the-ear headphones, and I'm talking into a USB microphone right now. This should be decent audio. I'm hearing whatever, and if there's any audio that's coming in over the, if somebody's asking a question or whatnot, I can hear that really clearly in my ears. Okay, that's why it's really important. So can you speak into Audacity and send it to MP3 or what? No. So what happens is most people are using Zoom. The Zoom is audio and video is being recorded on the local computer's machine. Okay. Very often there's an option to record separate tracks for the various people who are there. So you will have an audio track and I will have an audio track. And when I drop that into Audacity to begin to edit, I can then overlay the audio together and I can make edits. So I can clean up your audio and I can clean up my audio. So you don't have to do anything. All you got to do is just dial into Zoom and they're going to do the recording for you. You should not have to do any recording whatsoever. All you need is a good microphone and a good set of headphones. All right. Now, what does that cost you? Well, with the pandemic, being the last 2 years, most people should have some good gear now. But if you don't, what I would suggest is a simple microphone that can plug in via USB, like a Blue Snowball, which is there was the round one there. It can be on a little kickstand. There's also a Blue Yeti Nano. It's about $80, a little expensive. It sits on your desk, plugs into it, really good audio, really clean, super easy to use. Both of these are. Also, some people say, well, what if I want a swing arm? Well, that's nice. I'm actually using a swing arm right now. Yeah, no, it didn't come in that color, no. Amazon has some nice kits that kind of has a knockoff condenser mic. That's a USB, as you can see in the picture there, with a nice swing arm that attaches to your desk. Comes with a pop filter, not necessary. Just use the foam filter there on the bottom. You don't need to have the pop screen unless you're doing something really nice. Have good spacing so you're not going into the audio all the time. So good, 3 or 4 inch spacing between your mouth and the microphone. But $45, you can have a really nice audio setup for any type of interviews, any type of meetings that you're doing, any type of training seminars or anything. It's really nice to have this now because we're doing so much stuff online to have really good audio to do that. Here's a good example about putting your best face forward. So you can see down below, this is the Smart List podcast with Bateman, Hayes, and Arnett. So you can see Bateman is talking into a laptop because he's looking straight ahead, and we can see right up on that big schnoz of his, and we're going to stare up into his nose periodically, and we can see up, nearly to his brain. Now, Hayes doesn't care about his audio quality because he's shouting into a laptop. You don't see a microphone there. He doesn't have any headphones on, so he's listening to ambient audio pumped over his speaker, which could create feedback issues if you have a weaker computer. So he doesn't care about his audio quality, but he really, really cares about his video quality. So he has a nice webcam. Arnett looks like I don't know, I know that's a $400 microphone in front of him, $200 swing arm, nice headphones, but he doesn't really care about his video, which might be closer to more Will Arnett's speed. So you can see problems and you can see good things in each one of these images here down below. If I could have the perfect combo, it would be Sean Hayes's video with Jason Bateman's setup. So he's got the over-the-ear headphones, he's got the microphone with the good webcam. So you probably, if you're going to do video interview, you want to make sure you have a webcam. Try not to use your iPad, your Apple or your laptop webcam, because it's going to be looking up at your nose. So we'll see the nice big nose hairs. We'll see the double chin. You want to make sure it's pointed down to you so you look good. Let's see. I have my Mildred poster and my books in the background. So yep, there you go. So having material behind, so like the nice look behind Sean Hayes is good. And if you can't manage that, having stuff on the wall instead of like looking like you're shooting it at a public school there with Jason Bateman. I don't know what he's doing there. So definitely make sure you have good audio quality, and then pair that with good video quality if you want to be showing your face. Okay. So things to avoid. Obviously, let's make sure you sound and look good, not physically like with what you dress, but make sure you have a good webcam, good sound. It does reduce the pain to the interviewer. I don't want to cause them any pains that you don't have to. Next, when you're actually talking on the podcast or talking on the interview, try to keep your hot takes to a minimum. Don't go out there and saying Lord of the Rings is the most boring thing ever, or N.K. Jemisin is overrated. You don't want to have heat if you don't need it. Now, if that's your shtick, then fine. But most of us, it isn't. So make sure you try to be aware of that. Try to be positive. Try to be helpful. Try to be thoughtful. People really gravitate to that. Steer clear of the politics. Obviously, keep that in the chest. Double padlock. Don't let that out. It's not worth it. And last thing, don't meander. Try to stay on point. Try to stay focused to what the interviewer is asking. Shorter, tighter interviews are way better than long, meandering interviews. Meander. Did I misspell it? Oh, thank you, Joel. Thank you, Roland. There. Well, sorry about that. Extra things to do. When you're done with the show, whether it's YouTube, whether it's a podcast, make sure you subscribe and follow them. Okay, absolutely important, because you want to see how you want to see your stuff delivered in their feed, right? You want to see the engagement. You want to be there when it happens. You don't want to just do an interview and then run away, right? Some of the ideas is that you've done some research on the shows that you're trying to get on, and these shows matter to you because they're part of the genre of what you're doing. It's part of the ecosystem of readers and content creators that you feed into. So make sure you stay subscribed and follow them. Leave reviews on these things, on the podcast, on the comments, say thank you, get into the feed and respond if somebody says something like, hey, I really like that person's book. You get in there and say, thanks, I appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions. That type of stuff is really, really strong, really, really good engagement. Also, the interviewer sees that and they love seeing that. That's a really cool thing. They'll want you to come back, especially when you get your next book out. Next thing, share. Newsletter, family and friends, social media. You got to go out and share it because it's a give and take, right? They've invited you into their community to showcase what you've done. You want to then promote their community to your people. Okay, so just make sure you're giving both ways so that it feels equitable. All right, stay in touch afterwards, 1 or 2 months, continue to listen, maybe continue to comment, continue to be in their social media follows and feeds. It doesn't have to be all the time, but 1 or 2 comments here and there. The person's going to see that. They're going to like that. You're offering value. Okay. Best thing that I have that I've seen are people who offer value. It says, hey, I've listened to a lot of your shows and I see that you tend to have this theme. Well, I do a year end. So for example, if you're a writer, you can say, hey, you know what? I try to read all the best novellas for the Hugo Awards before the award season. I'd love to come onto your show and talk about all the books that I liked or the novellas that I liked. Oh, that's awesome. Because a lot of times interviewers are looking for more content and they'll invite you back. And if you get invited back, you get more touch into their community. So be there to offer value. We have a woman on our podcast. We do a lot of board games for educational content, and she specializes in board games. And we bring her on every year to talk about all the new hot board games. It's just the thing that we like to do. And so she keeps getting exposure to our community. She then goes out and promotes us, and it's kind of a mutual thing. So definitely see if you can offer value in that respect. Good communication, really important. I don't want to be sitting there at 8 o'clock at night wondering if you're going to show up, right? Send an email the day before. Hey, I can't wait to chat tomorrow. Hey, I'll see you guys in an hour. Looking forward to talking to you guys. That lets me know that you're coming, and it lets me know that you're engaged and you're excited. That really makes me feel good. Next thing, show up early. Don't show up at 8:05 or 8:02 or 8:01. Try to get onto the Zoom call 5 minutes early, or sit there and waiting for the Zoom call to start, because I can get a lot of the nuts and bolts stuff, or the talking and the communication and the setup. All that stuff can be done early. We can get out earlier, so I'm not spending as much time. So okay, that was a lot, about 45 minutes. So there you go, guys. Interviews. That is the gist of from my experience. So that would be best practice for you guys. So does anyone have any other questions? Stephanie, are you scared with your up and coming audio interview?
This was very, very helpful for me.
Okay, cool.
And yes, I am now terrified.
You don't have to do everything I said. I'm just talking about like what would be best practices. Really focus on getting the questions. So for what you're talking about, get the questions, ask them if they have questions, know what they do, get some good audio set up, and just make some good notes. And I think you'll do okay.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
No problem. No problem. Anybody have any other questions? No, everything's good. Everyone's just happy to get back into person. All right. Good job, Tony. You always got to give him the fight over you. Hopefully that helped. Interviews can be very wonky. This is obviously a very wonky talk, but I think having good success in the public space, interviewing things, people like to listen to stuff. I think it's kind of a cool way to market yourself and to be kind of let that personality come out. So awesome. All right, guys. So I'll stop the recording.